There are a huge range of huge problems across the African continent. And lots of these difficulties are local but repeated, and lots of them are kind of universal because they're to do with universal bad behavior, or they might be to do with the laws of physics, but you get them everywhere. And Africa's changing, it's true, not quite in the way that the enthusiasts of CNN say it is, but it is. You can see chinks of light, and sometimes I think it's because you see different sorts of problems, but it's shaking up a little bit, and things are changing, not least because of work like Anne's. And she would say, I'm sure, agree with us, that work like it that is being undertaken all over the place, inspired by her pioneering work and so on. So you see this changing, but you also see it not changing. You also see solid lumps of resistance to whatever it is that brings about better lives for people. The CNN thing, you'll get, pictures of Angola or something, they'll tell you, what property prices are like in Luanda and how that shows everything's much better now. And you also see if people walk half a kilometer out of town, you'll see the most appalling poverty where nothing changes and nothing apparently is in place to bring about change. So I'll just mention that because what I'm going to say now about our work is incredibly boring. I mean, it's the most boring thing you'll hear in a week or a month or even longer. It's just awful. So I've just got to prepare you for that. But it is in a context. It's in a context in which things need to change. And if I may say so, I think it's quite encouraging because an example of something that has brought about a change, and as it were, a measurable, observable, repeatable sort of a change. And that's because in some ways it's easy, what I'm about to tell you, and in some ways actually incredibly difficult. So, the problem we're talking about is the fact that you will not see across Africa the repeatable use of ordinary mechanical vehicles that you see in the Strand or Waterloo Bridge or even as far away as the other side of the river. Because in Africa, vehicles don't work properly. They break and they have unnaturally short lives. Even in capital cities and so on, that happens a bit. But in rural Africa, forget it. And there's a reason for this. The reason your vehicle, if you have one, it's embarrassing these days with climate change even to have one. But anyway, if you have a vehicle, it works for this reason. You don't know anything about looking after your vehicle, okay? I'm fairly confident about that. There may be an exception. There may be a young woman here who will say, oh yeah, I do. I know this thing inside out. I really know about this stuff. You be quiet. That happens, but you be quiet happens quite a lot. But it probably is true that you don't know how to look after your vehicle. So if you, and neither do I, by the way. I mean, I've got a better idea than some people, but I'm not a mechanic. Neither's Andrea. So if you take this particular group and project it over a very large area, say, to incorporate the United Nations, which knows nothing about this at all, you'll see that if you, for example, go to Africa with good intentions of, say, dealing with child immunization or any of these things that really need dealing with soon, and you buy a lot of vehicles from Toyota, and you fill in a form somewhere in a UNICEF office somewhere, and these things make their way and then break. They break after 2 years, generally speaking, whether they're motorcycles or any other kind of vehicle, and they leave behind them, in the course of the breaking, enormous disappointment and frustration, and a lot of dead people. dead children, dead grown-ups, dead everybody, because unless you reach people with health care, it's not going to help them in any way, shape, or form. You can have all the vaccinators and vaccines you like. If you don't reach people on a regular basis with this stuff, they're going to die. Now, that's a bit melodramatic, but it's nonetheless the case. And so what we've been doing all this time is to try and put in place systematic approaches to ordinary mechanical things that will endure in rural Africa, that will happen there all the time. So whereas out there, you have a Ford in rural Africa, there is no Ford dealership. There is no Ford parts, there are no Ford technicians, there's nothing out there. So if you're going to base your healthcare outreach on Fords, you're going to have a lot of trouble unless you put in place something that will ensure that they keep on working. Now, this is the boring bit. I promise it'll be boring. I'm not a person who comes up with empty promises. This is really boring. If you're going to do that, you have to have an enormous amount of supply chain behavior. You've got to have all sorts of stuff on computers you'd rather not know. You're going to have part numbers that long, and and the order in which the digits appear really is critical, because you don't want to be out there with the stuff that's been brought about by the wrong digits. So you've got to do all this boring stuff all the time, and you have to have enthusiasts who will do boring things to bring it about. And I put it this way because I know that what we do, even what we do, can often be seen as very kind of glamorous. There are lots of videos and photographs of our work, people flying across the plains, going out to save people, because people who make films can't help it. I mean, they've got to show something interesting. They don't want to show someone sitting working out a lot of part numbers and working out how you get these things out there. So that's what we do, and I've deliberately made the point about it being boring, because I actually think that unless you address the real underlying issues of development, the difficult stuff, like that, you are going to commit yourself to participating in a lot of failure and disappointment. So Andrea, on the other hand, has a much more exciting tale to tell than I do. So she's now going to tell you the good bit.
We've been doing this work now for 25 years, and I think that the core of this, as Barry says, is about the maintenance of vehicles, and that's brought about by training to a very high standard men and women as mechanics, as supply chain managers, as fuel managers, as parts managers, and so on. So the core of it is all about the technical management of vehicles in very harsh conditions, so that healthcare can really reach out to the most remote places. And then, of course, working with ministries of health, it's they who direct the vehicles. It's they who make sure that the health gets to where they need it to go. We don't make any of those decisions. We just enable them to do that. And once again, it's about us training the young men and young women who are health workers to ride and drive safely and make sure that they get there safely and they themselves are safe and other road users are safe. And then there are the financial models that go with that, because so few people ever talk about the money, and actually the money with any of these things is so critical to the longevity and the sustainability of any program. And I think it's at that point that what our organisation has done is to make sure that the ministries of health in Africa end up being the people who are responsible for the payment of the use of the vehicles. So that was the beginning. That was 25 years ago that this was set up. Barry and I started that when he was 41, he was 42, I was 41. And we've been doing this for 25 years. So, I can tell you, husband and wife working together is really tough. I can really vouch for that. But I think that it's also really helpful to work closely with someone on developing something so so difficult. And I really don't know what Anne would say about partnerships in this environment, but there are so many in the social enterprise sector of partners, aren't there, who've really worked together. So, you know, I think having that like-minded approach and the sort of it takes so much out of you to do all this that it needs that persistence and keeping going. So I just want to say that at this point, after 25 years, we're doing something pretty sort of daring. And it's been brought about by some really, really difficult experiences that our organisation has been through in the last year. It's been very difficult, very painful, but another a topic for another evening. But the outcome of it is very, very interesting. What we're doing, which is different, I think, from many organisations, is now working very, very hard to have the leadership and the knowledge management and the replication and the taking this forward to the people on the African continent. Not driven by us, but by them. They have all the knowledge about how to do this and how to take it forward. We started a program in January 2015 in Liberia, and for the first time ever in the history of our organisation, it was set up entirely by people from Africa. A team from Zimbabwe and a team from the Gambia went to Liberia and set that up, and now there's a full Liberian team working nationally across the country. And I think that really inspired us for them to see just how capable they were, and for them to want to take the ownership and the way forward away from us and onto their shoulders and taking it forward. It's really a scary moment for them and very difficult for us, you know, to see, you know, not to be kind of the leadership in this, but we are now turning ourselves into the supporters and not the leaders, because they're the leaders. And it's interesting to tell this story to all of you, because this is a, you know, deeply, deeply, deeply academic environment. And Barry is an academic person. I'm not. I left school very early because I wanted to be out riding motorcycles. I didn't want any of that learning stuff. So, but it is really interesting to see that taking this on isn't to do with academia or academic people. This is about people who are dealing with infrastructure, who really want to take the ownership and embed that in the African continent themselves. And so it is a scary moment, but we're looking forward to the next part of the ride.
It began by a complete wild accident, as all these things do, in Somalia in 1988, whence Andrea had sent me to look after a person who was reviewed by Save the Children Fund, with whom we were associated as a celebrity donor. And I was sent by Andrea to stop this kid who's actually a motorcycle racer of some repute going crazy. And I did okay. I did okay in Somalia. Actually, I did less well back in Nairobi, where he didn't do very well. People talked about it for years. Oh, you're the man who fought with the motorcyclist in the airport. Well, yeah, okay. So it was a colourful beginning, because I realized, as it were, that people were talking absolute rubbish. What a polite word that is compared to what I really wanted to say, because I've got a background in motorcycling, so I can say rude words. Absolute nonsense about delivering health care in Somalia. I know it's a difficult time, 1988, and it's never been right since, but it was absolutely and obviously not true what they were saying, what everybody was saying. And it was also not true about what they were saying about why, in that case, motorcycles were failing after 800 kilometers and so on. That obviously was the same sort of rubbish. So it's been two key things. I'm going to stop now. Two key things. First of all, this work has always been done by people from the countries concerned. It's always been led by them locally. Now it's sort of internationally led by them, but it's all, in Kenya, it's always been run by Kenyans, in Zimbabwe, Zimbabweans, and so on. There are no exceptions to that. Now they all work together, so they have an international thing. But it's always been that way, which is very important because, again, the idea that you'd get someone come from Sweden to show you how to change a spark plug is just ludicrous. So we've never done that. So that's an absolutely key thing. It wouldn't work otherwise. It isn't piety. It isn't any ideological notion. It's not that at all. It's just the way you make it work. It wouldn't work to have people coming in and out. So that's an important point to make. And it is also important, as Andrea says, to understand that, and I'd put it slightly more harshly, if you do something like this and you do it properly, working with your many colleagues, there are actually 900 of them now, and it works over 25 years, you're going to attract a lot of attention, and not all of it will be welcome. So do be careful what you start and how well. Be careful of success. It's going to be very dangerous. Gary's going to interrupt.
I'm going to have to interrupt now. So thank you both.